Welcome everybody. So introductions first. My name is Nikki Pledgett. I'm the social worker in CAMHS and I'm also one of the DBT therapists.
And I'm Sarah Mead, I'm the lead nurse and I'm a systemic family therapist, but I also work within the DBT team.
And today's session is, so we had, and I know it says on the information that's been sent out, quite a broad title, and we were thinking how on earth are we going to fit all of this into one kind of compact and condensed session. But we've named today's session Destructive Coping, Self-Harm and Emotion Regulation. And really it's about demystifying some of the things around self-harm, some of the common threads that come up in the work that we do, but also about giving you something to go away with in terms of coping skills, in terms of what we teach and what we promote. And that's through a less intensive programme through the Decider Skills, but equally through the DBT programme, which we run as an outreach team.
And DBT, in case anyone stands for dialectical behavioural therapy. And the main difference between DBT and other therapies is it's very much a sort of skills coaching kind of therapy. So we run groups where young people come and we teach skills on a weekly basis as well as have individual therapy.
So what is self-harm? So self-harm describes any kind of destructive coping mechanism where a young person causes harm to themselves. So we're talking about young people in general here. And it's usually described as a way to cope with distressing or difficult thoughts, feelings or emotions. So when emotions get really high, really intense, it's a way to relieve that pressure, and that's something that we hear often when working with young people. It's important to know and to say from the outset that, so this bit at the bottom is about the relief only being temporary, so it's a short-term fix. And often what we say, and what we again hear a lot of, is it changed the emotion in that moment. So self-harm, there's something about self-harm that's effective for young people in changing an emotion. It changes the emotion in that moment, but the problem remains. So we talk about emotional suffering, we talk about emotional overload, we talk about emotions getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Self-harm. Self-harm is the behaviour. It provides a temporary relief, but often the after effects then create a different, difficult emotion to deal with. So, who self-harms? Important to say from the outset, there's no such thing as a typical person that self-harms. It's something that can affect anybody at any time, at any point in their life. So, there's lots of research going on at the moment, and kind of the standard figure that we get is that it's around 10% of young people have or will self-harm. But because of the secretive nature of self-harm and because often we don't hear about it, it's estimated that it can be as high as 20%. So who self-harms? So anybody can self-harm, but what we know is that it's often as a result of people that are struggling with different areas of their life, different things that might be affecting their home life, things that might be going on at school, things that might be going on within their environment. We know that if there are difficulties in those areas, if there's distress that's being caused in those areas, then they're more likely to develop this pattern of coping.
So why are we so interested in it? What we've really noticed over the last few years particularly is a significant increase in self-harm and in the seriousness of self-harm. So these figures here are just young people that have been admitted to hospital, admitted to our paediatric ward following acts of self-harm. And often these acts may include things like overdoses, so quite significant episodes. And as you can see, the numbers are kind of, increasing quite rapidly. 300% increase in 3 years of admissions is something that we need to be really focusing on. And these are, as I say, these numbers are just young people that are actually admitted to hospital. We see so many young people that aren't admitted to hospital, so many young people that aren't even known to CAMHS. So this is really the sort of tip of the iceberg. We know that young people are using self-harm as a coping strategy, and we really need to be giving them other strategies in order to kind of manage their emotions. So there are lots and lots of myths as to why people might self-harm. The biggest one, I guess, is that self-harm is attention seeking. Many people that self-harm don't tell anybody about it. There was a big study done in Australia recently, and when interviewed, over 70% of young people were hiding their self-harm from parents. Over 60% of young people were hiding it from their friends. So in terms of, you know, it being attention seeking, that doesn't fit at all. Self-harm sometimes seen as a goth thing. I think we heard more of this a few years ago, but again, no evidence at all, or very little evidence to suggest that any particular peer group subculture will be more attracted to self-harm than others. Similarly, people think it's a female phenomenon, or girls are self-harming. Certainly within our team, in our department, we see as many boys, and sometimes we see different self-harming boys. So boys sometimes might harm kind of at ankles, where the socks may hide their harm, whereas girls might harm kind of, you know, tops of thighs, etc. People think that young people who self-harm must enjoy it. Again, there's no evidence to this. Often people will talk about a temporary relief, but people do feel pain and feel pain differently. And for some young people, you know, the harm that they've caused is incredibly painful. So young children presenting, particularly in our A&E department, you know, very much need to be treated as anybody might with any kind of injury. And you know, and sometimes they want to cause themselves pain. They think the pain is kind of, you know, part of the relief. And the other thing we hear a lot of, and the other thing that was brought to our attention, is that there were some studies suggesting that those self-harming are suicidal. Many people are actually just using self-harm as a means of coping. They're not trying to end their lives, they're trying to get rid of distress. And while there are links to self-harm and suicide, you know, that's the question that we always have to ask young people: what was the intention around it? So if these are the myths, we're
Why?
we're wondering if you've got any ideas. I guess Nikki touched on a couple, but we're quite interested in public perception as to why you think young people might be doing it.
So the reasons why vary from person to person, and it's completely individually specific, and often the examples that are given and people's lives change in different ways, and the whys are specific, completely specific to whoever presents to us. Common themes are difficulties at home, arguments or problems with friends, school, pressures, bullying, depression. One of the other slides just earlier touched on depression, and that idea that when we've been numb, that kind of feeling of not feeling for a long period of time, or numbness or flatness, it's a way to feel a different emotion. Anxiety, when panic builds and feeling like we can't get out of panic, we're seeing that increasingly more within the team in a response to panic and anxiety. Low self-esteem, so how we feel about ourselves, and kind of confidence, self-concept, all of those ideas fit into self-esteem and why young people might self-harm. And big transitions, so big transitions are again individually specific, so change of schools, change in home life, changes of any kind in transitions and adapting to transitions. And alcohol and drug use. So similar to the ideas around suicidality and self-harm, I guess one of the things about alcohol and drug use is so when young people are disinhibited, they might be more likely to self-harm, but also young people that are misusing alcohol and drugs and using those as a way of coping might be more likely to self-harm. So those can be individually specific, and it can be any one of those at any time, but equally, so when there's a few of those things happening at any one time, the distress and the problems get bigger and they feel more and more overwhelming.
And I guess the other thing that young people say to us is because they do think it helps, you know, and
Yeah.
it's quite addictive. People kind of get into patterns and habits of farming.
It's our
So-
favourite slide.
It is my favourite slide. What is it? It's a
Tell it is.
huge wave.
Yeah.
And what we think is that emotions often come to us in kind of in waves, and sometimes they can be overwhelming, and they can kind of, you know, flip us out. Any surfers might kind of really enjoy the raves. And I guess one of the analogies we sometimes use is if we can offer new coping skills, different things, and hopefully we can help people kind of learn to ride the waves a bit, to not be totally overwhelmed by them.
Yeah, and it, you know, also on the idea of waves, it's the idea that they come and go, and they will come and go. If we can learn to ride them without doing something destructive, then we're in a better place in terms of functioning and coping. So yeah, emotions as waves. So, thinking about emotion regulation then, and tolerating distress. In order to regulate our emotions and in order to cope with our emotions, we need to understand and accurately identify what they are. So part of the treatment is about identification of emotions. Often what we know is we misidentify our emotions. So if we're continually misidentifying an emotion, we don't know how to accurately respond to it and do something different with it. It's important to know that we need our emotions. What would life be like if we didn't have emotions and if we didn't have an emotional response to our environment and what's going on for us internally? So emotions communicate something to other people and they influence other people, but they also communicate something to ourselves and they influence us and our actions, so we need them. So, there are 10 basic human emotions. We're born with them, they are hardwired. Can you name them?
Did get a fair few.
Yep.
Shame, jealousy,
Envy, disgust, those are the ones that we missed, aren't they? So just as a point of interest in terms of identifying emotions, often emotions that are miscommunicated and misunderstood, or kind of we think that it's one thing when it's actually the other, are guilt and shame. Okay, they're often miscommunicated. Also, envy and jealousy are miscommunicated. So when we think that we're jealous and we'll describe jealousy, we might actually be envious. And again, so the point about accurately identifying our emotion is, first of all, it reduces, if we can accurately identify it, name it, and say it out loud, psychological fact here for everybody, is it reduces the emotional intensity by 30%, just if we can name it, yeah? But equally, how do we know what to do with our emotion if we're getting the wrong one, or if we're responding? So something, again, worth saying at this point, we might be really, really angry at something, but then feel really, really guilty because we're angry. We might respond to the guilt, but it was the anger that came first that we actually need to respond to. So again, you know, there's lots and lots of things going on, and ultimately this is a brief introduction to these ideas, but identifying and naming the emotion is part of the whole basis with which we learn to regulate them and cope with them better.
and one of the things we know these days is that young people communicate their emotions often by things like this, and this was a real challenge to Nikki and I. So we gave you the challenge of naming the kind of 10 main emotions, and we were both struggling with some of these. So I don't know if you can help us out. I think we can identify the happy face and the big
sad
grin
face.
and the sad face. But wink is the third one, I think.
Yeah.
There's an example that naming emotions, and I guess I'm curious because I sometimes my nieces and nephews are crazy for them on context, and I sometimes think, what is that? You know,
What does that mean?
but do I ask? No, I just think, oh well, it's one of those. Okay.
And again, the idea that we often assume as well, we assume what emotions are. So we might assume what emoticons are, but we equally might see something in somebody else and assume that they're experiencing, oh well, they must be sad, or they must be angry, or they must be... And we respond to that. So our environment is responding to our emotions all of the time. And again, we can often be miscommunicating them if we can't identify them accurately ourselves. Yeah?
And I think particularly in adolescence, I think often there's misreading of emotions between young people and parents. One of the things we do in our groups is come together kind of at some point. And I think it's sometimes worth saying, kind of if you're trying to ask your young person to do something, you know, this isn't an angry face, this is a face that's, you know, concerned about whatever. Because sometimes, I mean, this is my own experience, my son might read kind of anger when actually I'm really inquiring as to, you know, how he is, or...
Yeah.
So sometimes I think it's important to remember that we miscommunicate our emotions on a daily basis. So this is something we think about in our groups, is having kind of an emotional thermometer, an alert system. Sometimes we don't want to openly express how strongly we're feeling things, but we might be able to do that with a number. We use the term scaling a lot in our therapy, so on a scale of 0 to 10 or 1 to 10. And I guess when we're talking about huge emotional responses when young people are self-harming, by the time they're at 8 or 9, you know, I guess we really want to know to do something about it, because that's the time they're much more likely to be so emotionally dysregulated they might harm. So by the time you're at 10, you know, you're kind of in an ambulance. Or,
Yeah. And you're potentially doing something destructive, and then destructive again, and then destructive again. There's also something within this about recognising those different stages as well, and when you're experiencing different things at different times. Often we talk, again specific to DBT, but we talk about putting a gap between the itch and the scratch. Yeah, so creating a bit of time in between that and recognising what's going on for us in terms of our thoughts, in terms of our feelings. And if we can recognise that, again, we can intervene and we can respond skillfully or more effectively at an earlier stage.
So before we respond with a new skill, the first thing we teach
Always.
is this thing.
Yeah. Stop! Yeah. 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 It's meant to be a double P. Okay. It's not just poor spelling. Okay. And it's that idea to stop before we act. Okay. Stop before we act on an urge, and when we're acting on an urge to do something destructive. So stop is a skill, and it's an acronym as and often a lot of the skills are acronym based, but the S stands for stop. Okay, so just stop, and that, you know, and stop in every sense. Physically stop what you're doing. The T is take a breath. Yeah, take a breath, take 10. You know, just take a breath, take some time. The O is about observing. Okay, so observing everything that's going on around us. And so that's about noticing things as well. As I'm about to do something really impulsive, or as I'm about to do something that's potentially destructive, or if I'm even about to step into another argument that I know is going to go a certain way, or I have a prediction that it's going to go a certain way, just take a moment to observe what's going on. And that's observing what's going on inside of us. So kind of what am I actually feeling? So what's the emotion that I'm feeling? But equally, what's going on within my environment? The P is put things back into perspective. So there's lots of P's within this, but it's putting things into perspective. So within the decider skills, it talks about having a helicopter view. So if I could look down on this moment, what would I see? And if and again, it's about creating that gap. It's about creating that time between responding to that impulsive urge to do something destructive. And then P, practice what works. So do something more skillful. You have a choice, and that's what we're trying to teach all of the time. Often what we hear is, and we hear a lot, and very understandable when we've only got a certain way of coping, as you've already said. But, you know, so nothing happened. I went from 0 to 100 in no time at all, and I had no choice, okay? If we introduce this into that, actually, we have a whole range of choices of things that we might do differently if we put things into perspective and if we practice what works. And the practice what works is ultimately about the rest of the skills that we deliver as part of the programme.
And we clearly haven't got time to teach you
Yeah.
a whole lot of skills, but we did think we'd offer a couple. So these are things that we might be able to use after stop.
So, opposite action is a really, really, really useful skill. We use it as a team. I use it in my day-to-day life. It features everywhere. So again, going back, if we can accurately identify the emotion, if we can stop, then it gives us a choice about what we do next. If we can identify that we're experiencing sadness, what we understand from sadness is our urge might be to withdraw. Yeah, so we want to retreat, we want to withdraw, we want to put that duvet over our head and not see anybody. Is that going to be effective? Probably not. Okay, so the new action in terms of opposite action, so it's always about responding oppositely to the urge, to the behaviour. So it's do something active, go out, be with others. Yeah, it's hard, this stuff is. It's really, really hard. And what we understand is when we're experiencing an acute episode of sadness or an acute episode of any one of the emotions that we've talked about before, it can be really hard to do something different. Again, it's using all of the skills in between as well that gives us a choice about doing something different. Fear is another good example. So, I mean, so we often use an example of if we're really scared, really, really scared about going to a party and what am I going to wear, who am I going to see, who's going to be there, will they talk to me, am I going to be standing on my own, will my friends be there, da 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 da. So and the fear builds, yeah. What we might want to do is we might want to avoid it, so we just don't find ourselves in those situations. Is that always effective? And does that help manage fear? No, it doesn't. So we practice our opposite action. Often when we talk about opposite action and when we deliver it, these skills in their entirety, we talk about opposite action all of the way. So if I go to my party that I'm really, really scared about, and so I've made myself go, I've done my opposite action and I walk through the door and then I stand in the corner on my own with my head down and my kind of shoulders hunched over and I don't talk to anybody or don't make eye contact with anybody. I'm not doing anything about my fear and I'm not doing opposite action. I'm kind of convincing myself that I'm doing it because I'm there, but actually I'm not, and it's about doing it all of the way, yeah? So all of the way involves going into the party with your head held high, with your shoulders back, with making eye contact and introducing yourself to people, yeah? It's doing the opposite of what fear is governing at that time, yeah? Hard, really, really hard.
So that's the one thing we really appreciate, that these skills aren't kind of easy. They're big changes to make, and we spend time coaching people through them and maybe role playing them and just getting a feel of them.
Yeah.
But people really, the feedback is that it really, really works. And as Nikki says, we know ourselves, we try really hard to use these skills kind of in our work life and in our own kind of lives.
Yeah.
So one of my favourites, I'm afraid I haven't brought you all chocolates, I'm sorry Abby, but but one of my favourite skills that I do go to myself is known as self-soothe. So again, instead of doing something kind of distractive, going to something that instantly might lift your mood, might give you pleasure, is useful. And we ask young people and parents, when we run parents group, to create themselves what's known as a soothe box. So this is my soothe box, which I'll share with you. And we get people to put in things that are going to give you some instant changes in maybe emotional responses. We try really hard to tap into all 5 senses. So things that we can look at that might make us feel good, things that we can feel, things that we can smell, touch and taste. Okay? So within my soothe box, I have a gift that a friend brought from Thailand, which is pretty for me to look at. And inside's a really nice candle, which I can light, and it kind of gives a glow, it gives heat, it smells lovely. And it's something that somebody's given to me that's quite special to me, so that's one thing. I have a stress ball. We give these out sometimes in cams. So feeling stressed, actually this is quite a hard stress ball to use, but something instant. I have some pens and some mindful colouring. Don't know if anyone's seen, there's lots of books you can get out now, but it's about focusing on something and actually doing something. This is a kind of, a doing kind of action. We sometimes as a team treat ourselves to a little bit of mindful colouring. We've had particularly difficult phone calls.
Sarah keeps this soothe tin
on my
her
desk. On my desk at work. I have some white musk powder, which caused some controversy in the team today because it realised how old I was. White musk was body shop stuff that I was addicted to as a young person. But I love just rubbing cream in, lovely smell. And again, it's the action of actually doing something. All the time I'm doing these things, I can't be punching walls or grabbing a glass of wine or whatever else I might be doing. I have some instant rescue ones. That one's not open. This one is. So just little pipettes that you can put on your tongue. Give a change in sensation. I've got a lavender one. I've got all different ones. 2 or 3. What else have I got? I have annoying party filling, but it's made people smile. It makes me smile.
all afternoon. That's been going.
Perfume, Lutac. These are just items. And what is really important in a soothe box is that it has to be something that makes you smile, that lifts your spirits. A little instant chocolate fix. Pictures of my family, my sister's wedding, nice family snap. And my favourite thing in the world is a storybook that my mum kept for me from when I was 6 years old. And the things that amuse me, may amuse you or not, are things that I was clearly told to do as a youngster. So in the middle of my storybook, there are a few pages like this. I must not make so much noise. I must not make so much noise. I must learn to be quiet and listen. There's a theme. But there's also some stories that I wrote that will always make me smile. Shall I go with the chess story, Nick?
Yeah.
Okay, the team have had this story, read to them this afternoon. When one of the team actually came out saying she was feeling a bit low. I need to find it. So I don't know if you remember when you were at school, but sometimes you were given things like write a story and put all the words you can in, beginning with certain letters. This was my chuff story. I sat on a chair and I had a checked tablecloth and I had chips and chocolate. Then I had chips and chewing gum. I went to church and I drew on the church chimney with chalk. Then I walked past a chimpanzee. Then I went home, I had cherries and chips, and then I had chops and chips, and then I went for another walk. And then when I came back, I had cheese and chips. There's clearly a bit of a chips theme as well as a chuff theme there. But just reading through kind of, funny little stories I've written as a child. Brought a smile to my face, I'm glad it's brought a smile to your face.
Chips and chewing gum.
So, anything really. You can put anything in this that kind of, but the idea around it is things that get you in touch with, all your senses, and hopefully give you an instant lift.
And on this theme, learning to self-soothe is a huge skill in its own right, and finding ways to soothe and calm and relieve pressure, tension in any way for anybody's life is really important. It can be, if your favourite thing is having a bubble bath, listening to a certain type of music, or whatever it is, but recognising that that's what you're doing when you're doing it, is the skill to learn, and recognising that at the moment I need to do something different, and creating that time, creating that space. Often lives are busy, we get kind of railroaded into all different kinds of situations, and we feel like we haven't got time. Creating time in our day to soothe, to find some pleasure, to find some comfort, is all about learning ways to kind of regulate our emotions and respond differently, to learn about ourselves and respond differently.
And it's a reason why we say have something that you can instantly grab.
Yeah.
You know, have it near your desk, have it wherever you're likely to be stressed. One more?
Yep. And on a similar theme, so again, within the decider skills, but also within DBT, so it's about building positive experiences. Often when, you know, sadness is a good example of this. Often when we're feeling really bad or feeling really sad, we do less, we feel tired, and we do even less. Yeah? And life becomes a series of dark storm clouds that we're kind of rolling through, or waves that we're just not riding particularly well. It increases feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, because we're not doing anything that's either effective or positive. We take a view that all things are hopeless, all things are helpless when we're in that state of mind. So often, so we'll give a list, and it's maybe 4 pages long, and there's a lot of activities on them of things to just try, do something different, do something that might be positive. So you might know what your positive things are, but you might not have tried lots of other things as well. So within the decider skills, it talks about, so if you've got, if your life is, or it feels at times of sadness that your life is a bean jar full of black beans, everything's grey, everything's dark, it's about removing some of those black beans and replacing them with coloured beans, and the coloured beans are the positive experiences. So the more things that we do that can be positive, and whether that be a self-soothe moment, something that I enjoyed in my day, something that I recognise that I enjoyed in my day, whether that be I made some cookies and I took them round to the old lady next door, whether it be I went swimming, whether it be I took my little brother out, I made a cup of tea for my mum, a positive experience where we found something different, and recognising them and recording them. And often, and again, it will be completely individually specific, it will be completely attuned to whatever is your positive thing to do, and trying new things out as well. Often we get stuck in a rut, and there's nothing, when we're feeling really bad, there's just nothing that we want to do, there's just nothing that's positive anymore, and it's that big black dark bean jar. And there is, and there are, and when we kind of tie lots of these themes together, we create just a bit of space to do something positive and to do something different.
Okay, I'm looking at the time, and
Yep.
I'm aware that we did say that we would leave some time for kind of anything that you would want from us. Any questions?